Do you ever feel like fear keeps you from doing what God has called you to do? God has called John Short to spread the gospel in communist nations. And even though he's been detained and threatened and harshly interrogated, fear has not held him back. Why not?
Fear and faith cannot exist within my heart at the same time. When we live by faith, trusting the Lord, moment by moment, fear has no room in the heart.
Jesus never promised his followers an easy path. In fact, he told his disciples that the world would hate them. He sent them out as sheep among wolves. Jesus' words came true in the life of the apostles, and they're still coming true today in the lives of his followers around the world. Join host Todd Nettleton as we hear their inspiring stories and learn how we can help, right now on the Voice of the Martyrs Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Voice of the Martyrs Radio. My name is Todd Nettleton. We are taking time this week to share again one of the most powerful conversations we've ever had on VOM Radio, a conversation with Australian gospel worker John Short about his detention inside North Korea. We heard the first half of this conversation last week, and if you missed it, you'll definitely want to listen on our website, vomradio.net, or find VOM Radio wherever you listen to podcasts. Last week we heard how John Short was on a tour inside North Korea. He left some gospel tracts outside a Buddhist temple. That made the North Korean officials very upset. John didn't realize that the day he was doing that was actually the birthday of Kim Jong-il, the former dictator of North Korea. But the timing made the North Koreans assume that it was some kind of political act. We heard how the hotels in North Korea are run by the government and they have detention centers inside them. That's where Mr. Short was detained. He was questioned every single morning and every afternoon, including being asked to write a detailed summary of each year of his life. And he's 75 years old at this time. A couple days into his detention, Mr. Short began to fast as a way of drawing closer to the Lord, but that was something that really upset his captors. Word of John's detainment quickly became news, and believers around the world began to pray. I asked him if he realized at the time how many people were praying for him.
Completely isolated. I had no conscious feeling of anything other than will I be released and return to do the work that I do.
How was your prayer life while you were being detained?
Much more time for prayer. And I must admit that one then sees that our lives are busy, but there is a place of quiet rest near to the heart of God. There is a place where we can touch the throne and we can pray and intercede. I believe that Satan cannot read my thoughts, and Satan has no hold against the Lord Jesus Christ. He's a banished foe, and he needs to be told so. The walls of our imprisonment should reverberate with our prayers until they take away our voice. It should be articulated, I believe. So it's a wonderful time when you're on your own, and never so less alone when you're alone with the Lord.
So the guards that were with you all the time, did they respond in any way as you're praying out loud?
Very interesting. Majority of them were puzzled by me. One was quite sympathetic. His eyes said it. One particular one was filled with hatred. A 30-year-old, very handsome Korean young gentleman came in. The moment his eyes rested on me, I realized he was the full-fledged communist intern seeking to get position in the system. And his entire demeanor was a flick of the head and derision that we are of another generation and of another nigh on alien to him. And the hatred can be spiritually felt. So one, as a believer, we know that it's wise to be among the terrible meek of the world, for they're undone by meekness.
I know there was a big deal made in the North Korean press. Oh, Mr. Short has signed this letter of confession. How did the letter of confession, and actually eventually Voice of the Martyrs USA invited other Christians to sign a letter of confession, somewhat patterned after yours, because yours said, yes, I wanted as many North Koreans as possible to become followers of Christ. We confess that too. How did that come about, or what led up to that and then eventually to your release?
When we break the laws of the country to which we visit, that is a breakage of their law. But I do not view that as a sin against God, for I have my commission from on high that is superior to the law of the land. So yes, I broke their law, and I was very willing to admit, I've broken your law, but no, I did not have a political agenda in any way at all against the Northern Korean regime.
Yes, I did break the law. I knew it, and I broke the law. Yes, I want people to become Christians. So you didn't have any hesitation in signing the letter.
No.
Have you had any criticism from others about the letter of confession? The idea that, oh, you gave in to them or you did what they wanted you to do?
Yes, that's very interesting. I was quite surprised with this, that well-meaning Christians then went on to the internet particularly, but only one ever faced me face to face, that if they had been in that situation, they would not have confessed to anything. And they felt that it was demeaning, they felt that it was unfaithful to the Lord to have signed anything and to have acknowledged anything to the North Korean regime. So I felt that if it was true, if I defended myself, it would be a lie. If what they were saying was not true, it's better to leave it there. It's better for me to rather show that these things do not trouble me, that I was the one that was in the crucible, not you. And so then the day of the court presentation, I was then taken to this particular court, a very awe-inspiring room. I particularly asked for strength because I had been fasting for many days. I asked the Lord to not let my knees crumble under it, and the Lord gave strength to stand, to walk in a long walk to that court. I had no intimation the night before that I would ever be released. Next morning at 6 o'clock, the interpreter arrived and said, "You better get your things together." I was taken then out to the quintessential old-fashioned black Mercedes-Benz with darkened windows all around it. I was placed in the back with my interpreter and the driver, and then another man, a very surly gentleman, in the front. We were then taken to the airport, but I was not permitted to join the general population. Eventually, I was taken in to the main departure area, which is just really a concrete floor and just benches. Still had no possession of passport. I was still minded, and then once all were on the airport, then I was taken to the glass door, and then finally, when the glass door opened, I was given my passport, and then could walk finally to the aircraft. And I'd been fasting for quite a few days, but the Lord gave strength and got on the plane. The experience was surreal to be departing on that aircraft.
Let's talk about when you got back to Beijing and then eventually reunited with your wife. What was that like?
When eventually the Australian embassy gave me a phone and I could contact her, I said, "I think, Karen, it would be good if you and 2 other sisters could come and fetch me back to Hong Kong. I'm feeling a bit weak and I haven't." And she said, "Well, I've been fasting too." She'd fasted the entire time, every day. So, well, let's break the fast together. Let's have chicken congee, celebrate when you arrive at the hotel. So Karen turned up, and the particular hotel that we normally stay at in Wangfujing, very gracious to us and looked after us. And I'd been instructed that because I no longer had funds left in my wallet, I said, "Well, I've got a Visa card, and we don't accept Visa." I said, "What do I have to pay for?" "You have to pay for every day that you've been in detention." And so then,
So we detained you in this hotel and would not let you leave, and had 2 guards with you the whole time, and now you need to pay the bill.
so what little renminbi money had been left was left in my wallet. They took all of that. There was some Australian dollars or American dollars. That was all taken. And then they said, in Beijing, the company that you booked your visa through, if we can be assured that you will pay so many $100 American to them, we believe you, because by this time they believed that I was a Christian, that I would pay it. I said, yes, if you say that I have to pay such and such amount, I will pay that. So my wife and these 2 brave sisters then had to go and find their representative, which of course all these visa people are government officials, and paid the money, but made sure that it was not in the hotel, it was at a neutral place, and paid that cash. Let me tell you though one very fascinating incident that happened. We were then waiting for our brethren in the house churches in Beijing to come to visit us, and suddenly a gentleman walked by, and Karen said, "We know him." I said, "Do we?" And yes, he's a brother working in North Korea. I said, "Here." So she called him. He came over and we embraced and we shed tears, and he said, "I cannot tell you what a miracle this is. I've been searching for you, and I was told to go to the... I went there. You were not checked in there. So then I just happened, this is where I normally stay, so I came here, and I'm booked in here. I'm carrying fellowship for you, funds in Korean won from South Korea, to thank you for what you've done." Whoa. We were amazed. So he had American dollars, he had Korean won to put in our hands to say thank you.
And he was looking for you and just happened to run into you.
Happened to find us. Yeah. Then some of our brethren in Beijing visited us and said how that 20 house churches had joined together to pray every hour of the clock.
It's amazing to me because you have fellowshipped with the persecuted church in China. You have been that prayer warrior for them. And now this was, in some ways, God's way of showing you the value of that. And they stepped up and said, "Hey, now you're on the other end. Now they're praying for you." How do you respond to that?
Oh, it was very, very emotionally thrilling, but humbling to have these that live under such intense pressure themselves in house churches, but they can understand. They really support you in prayer. Tremendous experience.
Do you feel more connection with them now after this experience?
Yes, very much so. So in no time, we then arranged for a conference in the capital, for they wished for us to get more together. So co-workers from the south of China and from Hong Kong journeyed up to Beijing, and we had a very large hall in this particular hotel, and we had 100 present, and to make a report there to them so that we could fellowship in this for 2 days.
And so they came together to basically hear your report about what had happened. And what was their response?
To be all the more active in prayer, all the more active in witness for Christ.
When you got back to China, and I mean, you've been working in China for a long time. Much of what you do is what we would call secret work. And now here you are on national TV with TV cameras. Were you afraid that this was really going to stop the work that you do in China once it was known, hey, this is that guy who got arrested for taking gospel tracts into North Korea?
That's right. Since 1980, when eventually I was permitted entrance into China from Hong Kong, Chairman Mao dies, 76, takes 4 years for things to become stabilized. 1980, our prayer was answered. We could now visit all of the provinces of China. When this took place, I felt very much that this was the terminus, that I would no longer be permitted to do that which I love to do, and that is to encourage local workers in their witness. For we that are foreigners, we can draw alongside of the local worker and do what they cannot do, for they can do what we cannot do. So that being our ministry, to have that taken from us was quite a mid-progress crisis to face, for I felt that it was the end.
But it hasn't been. Talk a little bit about how that fear hasn't come to fruition.
None currently from my own residential situation in Hong Kong, but in China, several co-workers have said, when they hear that I'm going to reapply and see if we can get a visa and continue to do what we do, would you be interested to go? And I have quite a group of co-workers who would be willing to join together and to enter. Of course, the objective is, what can we do to encourage the literature to reach those that need it, that those in their meaningless existence might find meaning through the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Everything is relative to that.
Now, when you say reapply, you're talking about going back to North Korea. I think some of our listeners are saying, is this guy crazy? Why do you want to go back to North Korea? How do you respond to that?
I perceived that the investigator was most occupied with our political apprehension of them. And my concerted effort was to assure him that Christians are not actively involved in the destruction of their political power, but that we are actively interested in the advance of the gospel. That, yes, as I told them again and again, yes, we want more and more North Koreans to hear the gospel and become Christians.
So if more can become Christians, you'll go back 100 times.
Yes. Yes.
Without fear.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm struck by in your story is how unfearful you were. How do you explain that?
I've always believed, as a young man of 24, when I knew the call of God, that to board a ship to the unknown world of China, the only open door to China, Hong Kong, it was a step of faith. And fear and faith cannot exist within my heart at the same time. I either feared for my self-preservation, the first law of human nature, or was what I was about to embark on, was it a step of faith? Was I like Hudson Taylor? Hudson Taylor, in his first entrance to China, miserably failed under the London Missionary Society. He went back. He sat at the feet of his missionary benefactor, George Mueller, and he learnt not only salvation by faith, but he learned to live by faith. When we live by faith, trusting the Lord, moment by moment, fear has no room in the heart. So the only reason that I believe that there is no room for fear is because we're believing the Lord.
Were there any of the North Koreans that you dealt with that you felt like maybe had a little bit of softness in their heart for the gospel or for you, or was it a closed door?
Closed door, totally.
And yet, hopefully, you planted some seeds along the way that will come to fruition.
That's right. I believe that the printed page, that the presentation of the Word of God is the seed. The Word is the seed. We plant it, the rest is the work of God. The Holy Spirit takes it, and there is a harvest. Once I know that the literature that we have invested the Lord's funds into is doing its work, that it is being carried into North Korea, I have total confidence, because it is the Word of God, that it will do its work.
How would you say that you're different after this experience?
That's a very good question, and I believe that profession of faith is tested by the Lord, and He will, in His own time, He will take that which we have professed and allow us to be put to the test. Then it will be proven, like Abraham of old, because thou hast done this thing, in blessing will I bless thee. Blessing follows obedience to faith. Refining is a heated experience, but I've had glorious examples. When my hero emerged from 21 years and 9 months in prison because he would not allow in his thinking that the Communist Party was the head of the church. Christ is the head of the church. For that he went to prison. When he emerged from prison, there was no smell of the fire of the refining upon him. He came forth, he emerged from it without bitterness. His eldest son begged him to appeal to government for reparation. You owe my father so much. He would not. He said, leave it, son, leave it. We leave it with God. God allowed my hero, God's hero in Beijing, to outlive all of his persecutors. He lived to well into his 90s. His passing to heaven was a glorious release from a frail body, but it was a victory, for he knew he would live forever. We thank God for all prayer that is made for rulers, those in authority. We are commissioned to pray for them, to pray that the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. He can turn it, and he will turn it. Pray for them that are in authority. Pray for the suffering believers. Tens of thousands of believers among the 200,000 prisoners in the gulags of North Korea. Pray for those that are in prison. Pray for those who feel so hopeless and so helpless. Pray for them to experience that being born again, that they have life from God, and that they can, in that situation, still overcome. Yes, let us unitedly pray for the hermit kingdom, for North Korea.
This is Todd Nettleton. Thank you again for being with us this week on the Voice of the Martyrs Radio. There's another side to the John Short story, and that is the side of John's wife, Karen. I also interviewed her when I visited Hong Kong, and you can listen to that conversation on our website or in the VOM Radio podcast stream. We'll give you a link in the notes for this episode at vomradio.net. Again, that website is vomradio.net. You can also find VOM Radio wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to join us next week. My coworker, Brother Aaron, is just back from a trip to the Middle East, and he's going to be with us to share some of the stories from the Christians he met there, including a man who was persecuted first when he left Sunni Islam to become a Shia, and is now persecuted after leaving Shia Islam to become a follower of Jesus Christ. We'll hear that story and learn how we can pray right now for Christians in the Middle East. That's next week right here on the Voice of the Martyrs radio network.